He didn't bring bodyguards. He didn't talk about basketball. And when he left Traore's camp, LeBron James wasn't the same man. Nobody knew where he went. For 48 hours, LeBron James vanished from every radar. No Instagram stories, no training updates, no TMZ sightings, just silence. And then came one image, grainy, almost unbelievable. LeBron stepping off a private jet in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. No cameras, no flashy welcome. Just him, wearing a black hoodie, sunglasses, and a face heavy with something no one could name. People online debated, is this AI? Deepfake? But a local journalist confirmed it. The flight was real. The man was real. And the silence, that was the loudest part. No press releases, no sponsors, no entourage. Just the name signed in the guest book of the presidential camp. LeBron Raymond James. But why? 2 days earlier, in Los Angeles, LeBron had sat quietly in his private gym. Not training, just thinking. A small notebook lay open on the bench beside him. Pages half filled with sentences that didn't sound like an athlete. One line repeated, "Who am I when the cheering stops?" He hadn't told his team, not even his wife. Only one person knew, his private pilot. And when he boarded the jet headed for West Africa, he took nothing but a backpack, a Bible his mother gave him, and that notebook. The cabin crew asked no questions. Even they could feel it. This wasn't a vacation. This was something deeper. He landed just after sunset. Burkina Faso was quiet that evening. The air still and electric. It wasn't just the weight of security or politics. It was the tension of two paths crossing that were never meant to, yet somehow always destined to. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't greet LeBron at the airport. He didn't have to. This wasn't for the cameras. Instead, LeBron was driven in an unmarked SUV through narrow roads, deep into the military zone where Traoré's residence stood like a silent fortress. When he arrived, he didn't ask for food or comfort. He asked for one thing only: tell him I'm ready when he is. The meeting room was small, dimly lit, no gold-trimmed furniture, no giant presidential seal. Just a round table, 2 wooden chairs, and a soft flickering fan overhead. When Traoré entered, he said nothing at first. He simply looked at LeBron, not like a fan, not like a politician, but like a man measuring weight. LeBron stood up slowly. There was a strange quietness about him. Not fear, not arrogance, but the kind of stillness that comes from carrying too much for too long. And then he spoke, calm, measured, like someone letting go of something heavy. They call me king, he said, but I've spent most of my life performing for crowns. I didn't create. Traoré didn't move. He listened, not as a president, but as a brother. You know how long I've played this game? LeBron continued, not just basketball, the game, the smiles, the handshakes, the silence. They say I'm powerful, but I can't even say what I really feel half the time. Traoré finally pulled out a chair and sat. So what do you feel right now? He asked quietly. LeBron looked up. I feel like a man who's been screaming silently for years, and no one heard it. Until I saw you, the room went still. The words hung heavy between them. This wasn't about race, or fame, or politics. It was about something older, something ancestral. When I watched you speak to your soldiers, LeBron said, I didn't see a politician. I saw a memory, something we forgot, something they trained us to forget. He paused, took a breath. When I look in the mirror, I see a giant built in a cage. I don't want to carry chains no more. Not golden ones. Not invisible ones. Traoré leaned forward. You came all this way. For what? To remember who I was before. The world told me who to be. And that's when Traoré finally spoke a full sentence. then you're not lost. You're just finally arriving. LeBron exhaled like he hadn't in years. This wasn't a meeting. It wasn't diplomacy. It was confession. They talked for hours. Not about endorsements, not about politics, but about fathers, about silence, about how men learn to pretend. LeBron opened up like never before. He talked about being 9 years old, watching his mother cry behind a closed door. How he swore to never let anyone see him weak. How every win felt hollow after the applause ended. How he'd look at his sons and wonder if they were inheriting freedom or performance. Traore listened. And then he said something LeBron would never forget. The world gave you a crown, but not a voice. You wore it, but now it's time to speak through it. LeBron sat back in his chair. His hands were clasped together like a man in prayer. But his eyes were wide open now. Not just to Traore, not just to the room, but to something inside him. Something that had been waiting a long time to wake up. You said I need to speak through the crown, he whispered. But every time I try, they twist my words. They clip the truth. Traore didn't flinch. Then stop trying to speak. For them, speak to the ones who already understand you. A silence followed, not awkward, but loaded. LeBron reached into his backpack and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. It looked worn, pages folded, ink faded. I've had this since 2004, he said. I write in it before every big moment. But lately, the pages have been empty. He placed it on the table between them. Maybe I didn't know what to say anymore. Maybe I was scared to say what I really felt. Traore placed a hand on the journal, not opening it, just resting his palm over the cover. Then tonight, he said, you write, but don't write as a player or a brand. Write as the boy your mother raised. The one who still remembers what pain sounds like. LeBron closed his eyes, and for a moment, he nodded. That night, he stayed in a quiet guest room inside the camp. No luxuries, no distractions. Just a bed, a fan, and a view of a dark sky that stretched for miles. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, journal open, pen shaking slightly in his hand. But the words came, and when they came, they poured. I met a man who doesn't play games, he wrote. A man who isn't chasing fame. And in his eyes, I saw something I'd forgotten. Stillness. The kind that can't be bought. The kind that makes you question everything you thought was true. He kept writing for hours. Until finally, sometime around 3 a.m., his head slumped against the wall. And he dreamed. It wasn't just a dream. It felt like a memory he had never lived, but somehow belonged to him. A burning field. A crowd of masked faces. A little boy running barefoot through tall grass, clutching a torn cloth with strange symbols. He was crying, but no one could hear him. Then a shadow appeared. Not to harm him, but to kneel beside him. It was LeBron, older, wiser, wearing robes, no jersey. He said only one thing: you were never alone. And the child stopped crying. LeBron woke up with tears dried on his face. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he remembered the words, you were never alone. The next morning, before sunrise, he met Traore one last time. They didn't speak much. No goodbyes, no press photos. Just a firm grip and a silent understanding. Thank you, LeBron said quietly. Not just for the time, for the mirror. Traore nodded once. The world taught you to entertain. Now it's time to awaken. And with that, LeBron boarded the SUV and disappeared back into the dusty morning air. The flight back was long. He didn't watch any movies, didn't listen to music. He stared out the window most of the time, replaying every word, every silence, every sentence that hadn't been spoken but was felt. And he wrote for 6 straight hours. "They built me for noise," he wrote. "But something in that man's silence changed me. I thought I was awake, but I was sleepwalking in gold. This changes everything." Back in the US, questions exploded. Where had he gone? Why had he canceled meetings with Nike? Why had he pulled out of the All-Star Weekend appearances? LeBron's camp said nothing. No posts, no explanations, just stillness. Until a photo surfaced. It was him, sitting in a backyard patio, hands folded, staring at a small fire pit. But on the sleeve of his hoodie was a patch, subtle, small, Burkina Faso's military insignia. The internet lit up. Is this real? Why is he wearing that? Was this part of a deal? Is he making a political statement? But LeBron didn't speak. He didn't clarify. He didn't have to. The silence spoke louder than any quote ever could. 3 days passed. LeBron James didn't show up at his scheduled podcast interview. Didn't post his usual cryptic tweets. Didn't promote his new sneaker line, which was set to launch that Friday. The marketing team was panicking, but LeBron? He was calm. More than calm. Still. He spent his days off the grid, reading, writing, walking with his sons. And when his agent finally asked him, "Are you okay?" LeBron looked up slowly and said, "I'm not sure if I'm okay. But for the first time, I'm awake." And then, without warning, he appeared. Not in a commercial. Not on ESPN. But at a quiet press conference for a charity he helped fund years ago. One that supported inner-city kids with no fathers. There were no questions scheduled. Just a short message from the foundation. And then LeBron stood to speak. He stepped to the podium, looked around at the room of reporters and children, and paused. The silence stretched. Then he leaned in and said, "There comes a moment when a man stops performing and starts remembering. That's all." He stepped away from the mic and walked off. That clip hit the internet like a lightning bolt. No hashtags, no trending challenge, just raw truth. The quote was shared across continents. Teachers printed it. Young men quoted it on hoodies. Ex-prisoners painted murals with that line underneath. And somewhere in a quiet base in Burkina Faso, a young soldier showed the clip to Traore on an old tablet. He didn't say anything, but Traore's smile told the story. But LeBron wasn't finished. The world had only seen the tip of something much deeper. A week later, just past midnight, a video dropped. No announcements, no previews, just a file named "Remember." Black screen. Then, a split visual. On the left, LeBron walking alone through an empty hallway, wearing a simple hoodie. On the right, Traore walking through a quiet African military base at dawn. LeBron's voiceover begins, calm, low, almost like he's speaking in prayer. "They named me king before I even knew what that meant. They cheered, but never listened. They praised, but never asked who I really was." The video continued, not like a documentary, but like a dream. Images faded in and out. A young black boy holding a basketball. A tired mother wiping sweat from her forehead. A soldier training under pouring rain. A crowd of children in Burkina Faso, raising their fists. And then LeBron's voice says, "I thought legacy was trophies. But maybe it's truth. And maybe truth can't live in stadiums. Maybe it's born in silence and kept alive in storms." The final scene? LeBron standing in front of a fire pit again. Same hoodie, same patch. But this time, he's holding his journal. He closes it gently, looks straight into the lens and says, "He didn't teach me how to lead. He reminded me I already could." And then, the screen fades to black. One final line appears, white text on the silence. "When you stop performing, what's left of you?" The video spread like wildfire, not because of views, but because of how people felt watching it. Grown men cried. Teenagers sat in silence after watching it on their phones. Even athletes started quoting it, not for attention, but because it hit something deeper. Because in a world full of noise, this story wasn't entertainment. It was remembrance. The world reacted in waves. Some tried to dismiss it. Jest. Another celebrity stunt. Overrated symbolism. But deep down, people felt it. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was quiet. And somehow, that made it louder than anything he'd ever done on the court. In Ghana, a school principal paused her class and played the video for her students. In Chicago, a group of young men in a halfway house watched it twice, and nobody spoke afterward. In Brazil, a retired athlete whispered to his son, "That's what courage looks like when it grows up." No product, no promotion, just presence. And still, LeBron stayed silent. No follow-up tweets, no press explanations. He wasn't seeking viral. He was carving a memory. But behind closed doors, LeBron was changing. Not just spiritually, but emotionally. He began revisiting things he hadn't touched in years. Old notebooks, childhood letters. One night, he even drove alone to his old neighborhood in Akron, the street where it all began. He sat in his car for hours, staring at the cracked sidewalk where he used to dribble the ball until his hands bled. That night, he opened his journal again. "I used to think that saving my family meant becoming a legend. Now I wonder if it just meant becoming real." He thought of his mother, how she worked 2 jobs and still tucked them in. How she once told him, "Don't let them rent your soul just because they bought your shoes." And somehow, after all the arenas, the championships, the billions, it was that line that echoed loudest. Don't let them rent your soul. A few days later, LeBron did something unexpected. He called an old friend, not a public figure, not a famous name, just someone who knew him before the spotlight. He asked one question: "Do you think I changed?" The voice on the other end was honest. "You didn't change. You just stopped visiting the version of you that needed healing." LeBron closed his eyes. It was true. He hadn't changed. He'd just gone silent for too long. And then, he made a decision. Not for cameras, not for approval, but for himself. He sat down, pulled out a fresh page in his journal, and wrote, "The performance is over. The message begins now." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, something remarkable happened. Traore had said nothing publicly, not one word about the visit. But quietly, he sent a message to a youth group in the capital. Leadership isn't always about speaking louder. Sometimes it's about standing still, so others can find their voice. The group printed the quote and painted it on a wall beside a basketball court where street kids played barefoot. They called it the King's Return Court. And then, the world watched as LeBron made one final move, unannounced, unfiltered. He walked onto a stage during a youth mentorship event in Atlanta. No lights, no PR, just a mic and a crowd of teens. And this time, he spoke. "All my life, I chased greatness. But no one told me that greatness without peace is just noise. I met a man who doesn't wear a ring or sit courtside. He doesn't need lights to be seen. Because when his soul burns with purpose, the world notices." He looked up, eyes locked with the teens sitting in silence. "They told you to play the game. I'm here to tell you, you can rewrite it." The room went quiet. LeBron's final words still echoed off the walls. No applause, no music, just a stillness that held weight. And in that silence, a teenager near the back stood up, slowly, nervously, and said, "If they could silence you, what chance do we have?" LeBron looked directly at him, walked off the stage, and placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. The difference? He said gently. I let them. You don't have to. The boy blinked, nodded, said nothing. But that moment, it would stay with him forever. Later that night, LeBron sat alone in his home office. The fire pit crackled outside. He opened his journal one last time. The same, one he carried to Burkina Faso. And across the last page, in bold, uneven ink, he wrote, "We're not just here to win. We're here to wake." He closed it, set it down, and smiled. Somewhere far away, under the stars of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stood outside his compound. No cameras, no words, just the wind brushing across the trees. One of his advisors approached with a tablet. "Sir," he said, "LeBron's final message just dropped." Traoré didn't take the tablet. He looked up at the sky and said, "The message isn't what he posted. It's who he's becoming." That final message? It was simple. A short video. No music, no editing. Just LeBron standing in a dark room, holding a basketball in one hand and his journal in the other. He looked into the camera and said, "This ball built my world." But it was never supposed to be a cage. To every kid watching, never let the game become your master. And never let silence become your story. He placed the ball down and walked away. Fade to black. Months passed. The moment faded from headlines. The media moved on. New trends replaced old ones. But something remained. In schools, in prisons, in underground spoken word clubs. People quoted LeBron's words like scripture. Not because he entertained, but because, for the first time in a long time, he remembered. And in remembering, he helped millions do the same. If this story moves something in you, don't just scroll. Like the video, share it with someone who's forgotten who they really are. And subscribe for more stories that wake the soul. What would you rediscover if the world stopped watching you for just one moment? Sometimes the loudest revolution is the one inside you. When you stop performing, you finally start living.